The call came in at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd just looked at my phone to check if my alarm had gone off yet. It hadn't. I had 13 minutes left. I remember thinking I'd close my eyes for just a little longer, and then my screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. And something in my stomach said, "Pick it up anyway." "Is this Jenna?" A man's voice. Professional. Calm in that specific way that people who deal with emergencies learn to be calm. "Yes," I said. "This is dispatch with Riverside EMS. We have you listed as the emergency contact for a vehicle registered to—" I stopped hearing the rest of the sentence. I was already sitting up. They told me later I had a fractured collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, and a mild concussion. A pickup truck had run a red light on Maple Cross and hit the driver's side of my car at about 40 miles per hour. My airbag deployed. My seatbelt held. The paramedic on scene told my husband that the seatbelt probably saved my life, and my husband told me that later when I was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and a bandage on my head, and I didn't really process it until days afterward. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the phone calls I made from the back of that ambulance. The first one was to my husband. He answered on the second ring because he always answers on the second ring, which is one of those small things about a person you don't notice until you're lying on a gurney, watching the ceiling tiles of an ambulance roll past, and you hear his voice say your name like a question, and you start crying before you can even get the words out. "I was in an accident," I said. "Where are you?" "In the ambulance." "I'm okay. I think I'm okay. They're taking me to St. Michael's." "I'm coming," he said. "No pause." "No, but wait, no, let me check my schedule. No, I have that thing at work this morning. Just I'm coming." He was in Atlanta. We'd been living apart for 6 weeks while he finished a contract job, and he was supposed to fly home the following weekend. St. Michael's is in Dayton, Ohio. That's a 600-mile drive. It's about an hour and 15 minutes by plane if you can get a direct flight, which you usually can't. He booked a flight while still on the phone with me. I heard him typing. I told him he didn't have to come right away, that I was going to be okay, that it was probably just observation and I'd be home by afternoon. He said, "There's a flight at 8:40. I'll be there by noon." That was my husband. The second call I made was to my mother. She answered on the 4th ring, which means she saw my name, set the phone down, and thought about it first. I know this because I've watched her do it my whole life. She does it with my calls, with my aunt's calls, with anyone who might want something from her before she's had her second cup of coffee. "Jenna?" Her voice had that particular flatness she uses when she's been interrupted. "Mom, I was in a car accident. I'm in an ambulance right now. I'm going to St. Michael's." There was a pause. "Are you okay? I have a fractured collarbone and some cracked ribs. They think I might have a concussion. I wanted you to know." Another pause. Longer this time. "Okay, well, your father and I are actually in the middle of something right now with your brother." I didn't say anything. He's having a really hard morning. You know how he gets. My brother is 31 years old. He lives in my parents' basement. Not because of any particular hardship. He had a job, lost it, and decided that moving back home at 26 was easier than finding another one. My parents have been giving him time to figure things out for 5 years. I have been listening to updates about how he's doing for 5 years. I paid for his car insurance for 18 months because my mother said he was getting back on his feet, and could I just help out a little? And I did, because that's what you do. "What's going on with him?" I asked, even though part of me already knew I was making a mistake by asking. "He got a parking ticket," my mother said. $240. He parked in a handicapped spot at the pharmacy and didn't realize, well, he says he didn't see the sign. And he's just devastated. You know how he takes things. He's been crying since last night. I was lying in an ambulance with a fractured collarbone. My brother was crying about a parking ticket. "Mom," I said, "I'm in an ambulance." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm sure you're going to be fine. You said you're okay. Let us get your brother settled down and we'll come by later." "Which hospital did you say?" "St. Michael's." "Okay, we'll be there. Just let the doctors take care of you and don't stress." She hung up before I could say anything else. I held the phone against my chest and looked at the paramedic sitting across from me. She was checking something on a clipboard. She had kind eyes. She didn't look up, which I was grateful for. because I was trying very hard not to cry, and I wasn't entirely succeeding. "Is there anyone else we can call?" she asked, still looking at the clipboard. "My husband is coming," I said. "He's flying in from Atlanta." She nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable thing to have happen on a Tuesday morning. St. Michael's put me in a room in the ED around 8:15. They did a CT scan. They did x-rays. A nurse named Donna with a silver cross necklace brought me a warm blanket and told me the doctor would be in shortly, and I sat there in that papery hospital gown under that warm blanket, and I texted my best friend Renata because I needed to tell someone who would respond the right way. She called me immediately. "I'm coming," she said, before I even finished explaining. "You don't have to, Jenna. Stop. I'm 20 minutes away. I'm already putting my shoes on." Renata has been my best friend since the 7th grade. She is not a morning person. She works late shifts at a restaurant and usually doesn't get up before 10. She was lacing up her sneakers for me at 8 in the morning without being asked. She got there before the doctor finished the initial exam. I heard her voice in the hallway asking which room I was in, and when she pushed through the curtain, she looked at me and her face did this complicated thing, relief and worry all at once, and she sat down in the chair next to my bed and took my hand and said, "You look terrible." "Thank you," I said. "You're okay, though." "I think so." She stayed. She didn't leave to get coffee until I told her to go. She brought me back a terrible hospital vending machine granola bar because she knew I hadn't eaten, and she thought it might help. It didn't, but the gesture did. My mother called at 10:40. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" "They found something on the CT scan," I said. "A small bleed. They want to keep me overnight for monitoring." The silence on the line was the kind that has weight to it. "Oh," my mother said. "Yeah. Well, your father is? He's just finishing up helping your brother with something. We were going to head over, but your brother needs the car today, and your father lent him his. So, Mom," I said, "there's a bleed on my brain. They said it's small, right?" "You said it's small. They said it's small. That doesn't mean. Then it sounds like you're in good hands." Her voice had taken on that specific brightness she uses when she's decided a conversation is over. "We'll come by tonight, okay? After dinner. Your brother should have the car back by then." I didn't say anything. "Jenna, you're not upset, are you? You understand we're dealing with a lot right now." "I understand," I said, and I hung up. Renata was looking at me from across the room. She'd heard the whole thing. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want me to call them back and tell them what I actually think?" "No," I said. "Okay," she said, "but the offer stands." My husband landed at noon. He was in my room by 12:40, still wearing the clothes he'd left Atlanta in, his jacket slightly wrinkled from the flight, his carry-on dropped just inside the curtain because he'd walked straight to me. He sat on the edge of the bed. He put his hand on the side of my face very carefully, like I was something that might break. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. And then I cried finally, the way I hadn't been able to cry in the ambulance or in the ED or on the phone with my mother. Just all of it, at once, into his shoulder. He held me until I stopped. My parents arrived at 6:17 that evening. I know the time because my husband had just gone to find something to eat in the cafeteria, which is the only reason I was alone when they walked in. If he'd been there, what happened next might have gone differently. Or maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe it was always going to happen the way it happened. My father came in first. He looked around the room the way he always does when he enters a space, assessing, calculating, and then his eyes landed on Renata, still in the chair beside my bed where she'd been for most of the day. Renata is black. My father's expression changed. He didn't say hello to me first. He didn't ask how I was. He looked at Renata and said, "Who is this?" "This is my best friend," I said. "She's been here with me all day." Something moved across his face. I've seen that expression before, and I know what it means, and I am not going to pretend I don't. "I see," he said. And then my mother said, "Jenna, you look pale," and swept forward to kiss my forehead. And the moment passed the way those moments always pass in my family. Quickly, quietly, buried under something else before anyone has to acknowledge it. We made small talk. My mother asked about the doctor. My father stood near the door with his hands in his pockets. Renata sat very still in her chair and said nothing, And I watched her do it, watched her make herself small and quiet in a space she'd earned 1,000 times over by simply being the person who showed up. And something in me went cold and settled. My husband came back from the cafeteria around 6:40. He walked in carrying 2 sandwiches, saw my parents, and did the polite thing. Handshakes. How are you? So glad to see you. My mother hugged him. My father shook his hand. Everyone stood around my hospital bed being civil. And then my father said, "Well, it sounds like you've got plenty of support. We should probably get back to your brother. He's had a rough day." My brother had had a rough day. My brother, who was at home in my parents' basement, healthy and uninjured, upset about a parking ticket. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at Renata, who was looking at her hands. And I said, "Yeah, you probably should." They left by 7. They hugged me at the door and told me to call if I needed anything. And I said I would, and the curtain fell close behind them, and my husband looked at me with this very careful, measured expression that meant he was waiting to see what I needed. I said, "Can you ask the nurse when I can go home?" He said, "Of course." He didn't push. He never pushes. That's one of the things I love most about him. They discharged me the next afternoon with a follow-up scheduled for 48 hours later, and a list of concussion protocols longer than my arm. My husband drove me home. Renata had left that morning after sleeping in the chair all night, which the nurses had quietly allowed because Donna with the silver cross had told them she was my sister, which was not technically true and also completely accurate. The drive home was quiet. I sat in the passenger seat with my collarbone brace and my discharge papers, and I watched Ohio go by out the window, all that gray March sky and the flat fields starting to think about green, and I thought about all of it. About the ambulance and my mother's flat voice and my brother's parking ticket. About Renata lacing up her sneakers at 8 in the morning. About my husband typing while still on the phone with me, booking a flight, not hesitating. I thought about the look on my father's face when he saw Renata. I'd been carrying that look for a long time, longer than I wanted to admit. When we got home, I sat down on the couch and my husband made me soup even though I told him I wasn't hungry, and I ate it anyway, and afterward I opened my laptop and I did something I'd been thinking about for years. I had an automatic transfer set up to my parents' checking account. $250 a month. I'd started it 4 years ago when my mother mentioned they were struggling to make their mortgage payment, and they weren't struggling anymore. Hadn't been for at least 2 years. But the transfer had kept going because no one had ever asked me to stop, and I had never volunteered to. I canceled it, and then I sent my brother a Venmo request for the 18 months of car insurance I'd paid. $720. I knew he wouldn't pay it. I knew he wouldn't pay it. I knew he'd show my mother, and my mother would call me, and there would be a whole thing. I didn't care. I set my laptop on the coffee table, and my husband put his arm around me very carefully, avoiding the brace. And we sat there in our quiet house, and I felt something shift. Not dramatically, not in the way things shift in movies, where the music swells and the character has a moment of clarity and everything is bathed in golden light, just quietly. The way a door closes. My mother called 2 days later. I was at my follow-up appointment. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was mostly about how hurt my brother was by the Venmo request, and how she hoped I wasn't going to let a little accident make me do things I'd regret, and how family is family no matter what. I listened to it once. I did not call back. My follow-up came back fine. The bleed had resolved on its own, which the doctor said was the expected outcome, but which still felt like something to exhale about. My collarbone would take 8 weeks. My ribs would take longer. Apparently, I would need to be careful. I would need to be careful. I would need help. My husband extended his Atlanta contract by 3 weeks, renegotiated his remote arrangement, and drove back to Dayton the following Monday with his car packed. He said it wasn't a big deal. He said he'd been thinking about asking to go remote anyway. He said the timing actually worked out. He's a very bad liar, but in the best way. Renata came over twice a week with food she'd made herself. Nothing from a restaurant, actual meals in containers with labels that said things like Tuesday soup and the good bread. She helped me shower the first week when my collarbone made everything impossible. She sat with me through the follow-up appointments when my husband had calls he couldn't move. Not once did either of them make me feel like a burden. My mother texted a few times. Short messages, "Hope you're healing well. Let us know if you need anything." The kind of texts that satisfy the sender without requiring anything of them. I responded when I felt like it. I've been thinking a lot in the weeks since the accident about what it means to actually show up for someone. Not in the abstract, not "I'll be there for you" as a thing you say, as a promise that lives in greeting cards and wedding speeches, but in the actual physical, logistical sense. Showing up means canceling things. It means rearranging. It means getting in a car or on a plane, means lacing up your shoes before you're awake, means sitting in a hospital chair all night, because the alternative is leaving, and you're not leaving. My husband booked a flight before he knew how serious it was. He came because I called, not because he'd assessed the situation and determined the severity warranted travel. He came because I was his person and I was in a hospital, and that was the only calculation that mattered. Renata came because that's who she is. My parents didn't come because my brother had a parking ticket and the car was busy. I know my family loves me in the way that they're capable of loving. I've made peace with the fact that that capacity is smaller than I needed it to be, and that I spent a long time, longer than I should have, longer than I want to admit, trying to make up for that gap by making myself useful, by paying car insurance and setting up transfers, and never asking for anything too inconvenient, by being the daughter who didn't need much. The thing about being the daughter who doesn't need much is that eventually you do, and then you find out who actually shows up. I found out. The transfer is still canceled. The Venmo request is still unpaid. My brother texted me once, just once, to say that he thought what I did was pretty messed up, which I found almost impressive in its audacity. I didn't respond to that one either. My collarbone is healing. My ribs still ache when the weather changes, which apparently they will for a while. My husband is home. Renata came over last Sunday and we watched a movie and ate too much popcorn, and she fell asleep on my couch, and I covered her with a blanket and looked at her for a second before I turned off the lamp. She gave up a night's sleep to sit in a hospital chair for me. Some people show up when it's convenient. Some people get on a plane before they even know if they need to. The ones who get on the plane, those are the people you build your life around. I'm just glad I finally know which is which. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since the accident. Not in a dramatic way, not sitting by a window in the rain having some kind of revelation. Just quietly, in ordinary moments. While I'm making coffee. While I'm driving to a follow-up appointment. While I'm watching Renata fall asleep on my couch again, with half a bowl of popcorn balanced on her chest. The thing I keep coming back to is this: nobody woke up that morning and decided to be who they were. My mother didn't choose, consciously, to set the phone down and think about whether to answer. My father didn't plan to walk into that hospital room and look at my best friend the way he did. My Robert's years old. Sit down and calculate that his parking ticket was worth more than my fractured collarbone. They just acted from the inside of who they'd already become, from years of small choices that had quietly added up into a kind of character. And so did everyone else. Renata didn't decide to be the person who laces up her shoes at 8 in the morning for someone she loves. She just is that person, because of every time before this that she chose to show up when it would have been easier not to. My husband didn't decide to book that flight because he assessed the medical severity and determined it warranted travel. He booked it because he spent years becoming someone for whom that's not even a question. That's what I think about when people talk about who someone really is. Not the big declarations. Not the "I'll always be there for you" said at a dinner table or a birthday or a wedding toast. The real answer shows up at 6:47 in the morning when the situation is inconvenient and no one is watching and there's no social reward for doing the right thing. I spent years trying to be useful enough to earn a kind of love that was never going to arrive the way I needed it to. I paid the car insurance. I set up the transfer. I asked for nothing and made myself small and quiet and low maintenance, thinking that if I never needed too much, I'd never be a burden, and if I was never a burden, then maybe the love would show up when I finally needed it. That's not wisdom. That's fear dressed up as generosity. And I think a lot of people, maybe most people who find themselves in a story like this one, know exactly what I mean. What I'm learning slowly is that the most honest thing I can do for myself and for the people around me is to stop rewarding absence and start building toward presence, not dramatically. Not with a speech or a confrontation or a Venmo request, though sometimes a Venmo request is its own kind of clarity, just quietly, redirecting, choosing every day to invest in the people who have already shown me who they are. Renata showed me, my husband showed me, even Donna, the nurse with the silver cross, who bent a rule so my best friend could stay the night. She showed me something about what it looks like to choose kindness in a small, unremarkable moment that meant everything. You don't have to have a dramatic falling out to start living differently. You just have to get honest about what the evidence says, and then let that honesty change what you do next. I'm working on that.